Right, it's time for my what am I sowing and what am I growing guide for August. There's a lot to keep track of, so I've got on my laptop here, and all the details, all the nitty gritty details are. You can find a link to them in the description below. So there's no point taking notes or anything like that because it's all there. Well, at least I hope it is. So as always, what I like to do is I like to start off with July. And what I've just done is extract like some of the interesting bits from July. July's a pretty boring month. There's just lots of repeat successions of brassicas and lettuces and things like that. And there's not a lot of point talking about those. But there were a few things that are worthy of note. So the first thing is the late cucumbers. I've got one batch of my late cucumbers here. These are the ones that I started, if I can find actually the date on these. I can't find it, but I'll put it up as an overlay. But a couple of months ago anyway. And these are the ones that I started on the 5th of July. So these are almost ready to go into their containers. And they'll go in the, somewhere around here or in one of the corners or something in the greenhouse. And they're the late ones. So they're the latest ones in the greenhouse. I'll keep those going probably till well into October. And then we'll switch over to the ones that I'm going to sow later on this month, which will go into the conservatory. And these are doing pretty well. So although I sowed these pretty late, as I say, it's pretty annoying that I can't find the date when I sowed them. But they're doing well now. Got lots of little cucumbers on them. And of course, we've got loads of cucumbers on the allotment as well. So we're pretty flush with cucumbers right now. You'll notice that this greenhouse is pretty empty. And I've been clearing it out pretty quickly. I'm almost ready to take the last few tomatoes off these sun gold and honeycomb plants. They're almost completely finished. There's just like the very top trusses that still need to be cleared. And actually quite a few of those are split anyway. So probably next week these plants will be out and they'll be replaced by the side shoots that I took off these plants. And so so we'll be quite pleased to get those plants in here. They're just on the drive at the moment. I'll put a picture up of those so you can see them. And we've also got the Tumbling Tom Yellows, the Orange 2 and the Red Profusion, and they're just here and they're looking pretty good. And again, probably sometime next week I'll put those into the hanging baskets. The hanging baskets are currently on the allotment. Just because we've been away on holiday. It's just too hot to keep plants going in here, but I've got them outside on the allotment and they survived fine while we were on holiday. So it'd be nice to have those hanging baskets back in here. I'll also soon be bringing the strawberry plant hanging baskets back in here for my late crop of strawberries and their ever-bearing varieties. So that's the cucumbers. The parsley is here. It's doing okay. That's the parsley that will eventually go in the polytunnel for a winter crop of parsley. And the sugar snap peas, I've actually got my first sugar snap pea. Obviously, I think we've had like 6 successions of sugar snap peas, but this is the last of my successions of sugar snap peas. And I've got my first one on those, and I'm really looking forward to having them again because although we've had them since sort of April time, I really love the sugar snap peas, and so I just want them to keep going for as long as possible. The Algarve and the Cobra French beans are growing really well out there. Of course, I've cleared the French beans out of here now, and now that I've got loads outside. And I like to do a late succession again, and so they're growing pretty well. I think they've just reached the top of the canes on the allotment from a July sowing. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, we're on the 30th of July today, so in 30 days, they've gone from being sown to being at the top of the canes. That is just how fast things grow with warm days and long days of sunshine. And it's quite incredible when you think how long it took for things to grow rather in spring. So I put my last few Mokum carrots in. They're about this big now, and they're the ones that will provide nice sweet salad carrots in late autumn. And I've got 2 trays of salad onions. Again, they're the ones that we're going to be eating in sort of late autumn, and I'll be sowing the ones I'm going to eat in winter very soon. So that is kind of the minimal view of everything that we did in July, and you can see all the details as said in the link in the description below. So now we'll go on to August, and in this minimal view again that I've got here, you can't see all the details. Again, if you want all the details, look down in the description below. And I've also kind of just filtered out a lot of things like, you know, repeat successions and the lettuces and all that. I'll come back to those later on. And we'll also take a sneak peek at September, because it's quite important to know what gets done in August and what gets done in September, you know, and that getting those timings right is actually pretty important. Either you'll do things too early or you do things too late, and it's taken quite a few years for me to get the hang of it. But of course everything does depend a little bit where you are. I notice a lot of people down south, for example, especially people who are growing down south in full sun, can get away with doing things much later than I can, and that's quite important to note. And of course, if you're up in Scotland, you probably have to do things much earlier than I do. But I'm in northwest of England, and so these are the dates that work for me. So first off, right at the beginning of August, I'll do some salad onions. I like to do things like Lilia, which is a purple one, it's lovely, and Guardsman, which is a sort of white Lisbon type, but I think it's just a little bit better than white Lisbon. Stands a little bit taller and stands a bit sort of well, it's called Guardsman, so it stands up straight. So white Lisbon tends to be a little bit floppier, which is obviously not what you want in winter. So that's why I like Guardsman. So that's the early ones. They're the ones we're going to be eating over winter. And then we'll do some later ones, of course, and even some in September that we're going to be eating next year and into spring next year. So next up is the Tough Ball Overwintered onions. Now, the actual suppliers of those often say do them in July, late July, sometimes even the middle of July, some people say. I find that is far too early. I don't really understand why they do that, because the tendency is when you sow them that early, the plants tend to be really big by the time you get to spring. They think they're in the second year and they go to seed. I find if you do them 2 batches, one early August, one the middle of August, then the early August one will be ready for harvest sort of late May, early June, and the one that you do in the middle of August will be ready for harvest sort of the middle of June to early July, depending on where you are, depending on what sort of year you have. There's a risk that the first sowing, a few of those might go to seed, although this year none of them went to seed from that early sowing. But it doesn't really matter so much that a few of those go to seed, because you're just going to eat those fresh. The second sowing you might want to keep. In fact, we do. We like to keep that second batch, the one we sow in the middle of August, until about sort of January time, something like that. And it's our primary storage white onion. And then we switch over to a February sown one like Vento or Styron for the white onion, and then, you know, all sorts of different red onions that don't really matter, because we're not going to do those until February. So that's the idea with the overwintered onions. Anyway, do 2 sowings for me, as I say, early August, middle of August, one to eat fresh and store, and one to just store. And yeah, it's really nice. It means we can have a nice continuous supply of high quality onions pretty much all year round. Well, all year round. So next up are the Asian greens. I've got a few Asian greens in the ground at the moment, but not very many. This batch of Asian greens I find are really great gap fillers. Asian greens grow really, really fast at this time of year, but they do have a tendency to suffer from pests and diseases, and they also have a tendency to bolt. And so this is not the sowing of Asian greens that you want to do to eat in winter. This is the one that you want to do really good, that grow really quickly, and you're going to basically sow them in early August and then be eating them in the beginning of September, eat them through sort of all the way through September, then clear them and get those beds replanted for winter. So that's the sort of way that I do the Asian greens. And I'm going to do Rosetto, red stem pak choi and tatsoi, which is just a nice mix of different types of Asian greens basically. And I have to actually plant those in the polytunnel, just because I tend to have a bit of bed space in the polytunnel at this time of year. And I say they're all out and replanted with lettuces and salads for winter by the time we get to October. But if I've got a bit of space anywhere else in the garden, whatever, you could do that. If you do suffer from flea beetle, put them in hanging baskets. That's what I like to do. So next up are turnips. I've got a few turnips in the ground at the moment, but I like my turnips and my radishes, to be honest, to be harvested in cooler weather. I think they're just so much nicer when they're harvested in cooler weather, so I don't grow them through summer. Well, I don't grow them for harvest in summer. So both the turnips and the radishes that I start in early August, I will be eating in September, and as I say, it's starting to cool a bit in September, and I'll do some multiple successions of those, which I won't talk about as we go through August and into the very early September. And yeah, it's just really nice to have them again in the diet, and then I won't miss them once we get to sort of the end of October when they're pretty much finished. We don't do an overwintered turnip, but you know, there's an option to do that as well if you want. So next up is a really important crop for us, which is lamb's lettuce. And again, this is one where we find, because we're growing sort of up north, and we're growing in partial shade, I like to get my lamb's lettuce started about the beginning of August, and then I'll do another succession a bit later on, sort of middle of August. There's two reasons for doing that. One is bed space often doesn't come available, so I really like to sort of do some early ones so I get a nice sort of harvest in early December sort of time, and then I'll do some late ones which will harvest in sort of January, February sort of time. The second reason is because the early succession can sometimes suffer from mildew. If you're not on top of watering, it's kind of counterintuitive, but lamb's lettuce really likes a lot of water. It's kind of, you know, it likes to grow basically in autumn and winter, and then it goes to seed in early spring. So it's used to a lot of water, and if it doesn't get a lot of water, it's stressed, and if it's stressed, it gets mildew. So you've got to keep it well watered. And often, you know, in August and September, I got a lot of things distracting me from gardening, so I often don't water it very well. And if that's the case and it gets mildew and I lose that succession, at least I've got the second succession, and that is going to grow later on in September when there's a lot more rainfall, and so it's much more likely that I won't get mildew. So they're the sort of two reasons. First succession really of spinach. So we haven't had any spinach other than New Zealand spinach over winter. New Zealand spinach is lovely though. We've been eating it raw, and not so actually so much in cooking, because it's just actually quite nice in salads. And so we're not really missed having a true spinach, but New Zealand spinach finishes really sometime in September. I mean, it clings on, but leaf quality reduces substantially in September, and it's definitely reducing in October. So definitely by September or you know, very early October, we want lots of spinach for our salads and for cooking. And Ribino is my favourite. Now, it's not the best spinach if you want a spinach to sow once and then keep on harvesting it all the way through winter and into spring from a single sowing. Medania is probably a better spinach for that. But Medania is kind of one of those like average spinaches. You know, it's not very good at any time of the year, but it's sort of lasts a long time, and that's the best you can say of it really. So if you want one sowing, harvest it all the way through, that's fine. If you actually want optimal spinaches for different times of year, so the best tasting, best looking, crunchiest leaves and all of that sort of thing, then I think Ribino is a great one. Red Kitten, things like that, they're great for this time of year. Then in midwinter, you're better off with something like giant winter. And then, you know, there's a variety of other spinaches that are better for spring, which I'll talk about closer to spring. So next up are, all these things can go outside at the moment. Next up is scarlet, dwarf green, sympathetic, cadet. These are all kales. And it's a bit late for kales, but sometimes I just, well, always generally, I just sow a few. If we get any losses, then we can always pop a few kales in and they'll be great for spring. If we grow them under cover, under a low tunnel, they'll be great for winter. Sometimes even from an August sowing, even outside, you can sometimes get a harvest for winter, but not always. It depends on the weather and it depends on how much light they're getting. The space I tend to have available for things like kale tends to be in light shade, and so they don't grow very fast. So they're better for spring. Anyway, next up, I mentioned it earlier, my cucumbers. The last succession of cucumbers. They're going to go in my conservatory. There's not enough light in my conservatory in sort of October and November to keep them going, but I've got supplementary grow lights in there, and it's just really nice to have cucumbers growing for as long as possible, because I grow these little cucumbers, you know, this sort of size, sort of 4 inches at harvest time, and they're just really popular with everybody, and I like to keep them going as long as possible because I don't buy any cucumbers. So there are more successions of turnips. Turnips pretty much run out of steam by about the middle of October. So if they're not really grown by about the middle of October, then they're probably not going to grow. But they do hold in the ground quite well. So if you can get them to maturity by the middle of October and you've got enough bed space, which I often don't, then let me just pause for this plane to go over. Yeah, you can leave them in the ground from sort of the middle of October through until sometime in November, and the quality is reasonably okay. Got a big bumblebee there. Not very happy that he's stuck and can't find the door. Yeah, but you need obviously a bed that's fairly free of slugs, otherwise they're not going to be very nice to eat. So the next thing that I did, this is the first time I've done it actually. Last year was the first time I did this. I just got a whole load of these sort of containers, like 30 litre containers, and filled them with chard, golden beetroot, red beetroot, and bull's blood beetroot, which is a beetroot, but it's actually generally grown for the beautiful dark red leaves. And the golden beetroot was fabulous, but all of those were actually really good, and we harvested those for leaves from about, what would it be, probably late September all the way through until probably March, maybe even early April or something like that. Absolutely incredible. We started them off in here and on this bench. So when I started taking these peppers out, I put them in here, and then we took them to the allotment and popped them in the polytunnel in about November, maybe early December, something like that, and I replaced them with trays of new plants, basically, new beetroot and chard plants. Yeah, and we just harvested them as baby leaf for salads. And as I say, the golden beetroot was superb. It's so good. The small golden beetroot leaves are so lovely. And yeah, it was an absolute revelation, really. We probably put maybe a third of our salad leaves were basically something from the beet family, all the way through winter, well, autumn and winter and early spring. It was great. So talking of winter salads, next thing on my list, about towards the end, really, of August, I start the miner's lettuce, or Claytonia. So that is a fabulous salad ingredient. It'll grow outside. It's pretty hardy, but honestly, if you can grow it under cover, especially in a polytunnel with good light, that bumblebee, especially with in the polytunnel with good light, it's fabulous. I mean, the number of cuttings I've taken off it, maybe as many as 4 cuttings or something like that over its life. Start sort of harvesting it November sort of time probably, yeah, then keep on harvesting it, cutting it back. It just keeps on regrowing all the way through until March time, something like that, when it starts to go to seed. It is fabulous. Everybody loves it in the salads. It's really good. And salad rocket as well, that is also great. We still have first succession towards the end of August, and we'll do another one in September. The one in August is better outside. Same with the Miner's lettuce. The one in August is better grown outside, and then the ones in September are better grown under cover. And then you can also start wild rocket. Wild rocket is so slow to grow when you start it in August or early September, and you just overwinter it in pots in your greenhouse or polytunnel or whatever, and then plant it out in spring, and it just gives you basically, when all your salad rocket's gone to seed, your wild rocket's kind of ready, and it's just ready a little bit earlier than it would be if you start it in spring. So that is almost everything for August. Let me just pull up the things that I've missed. Right, So multiple successions. So multiple successions of salad onions. So it's worth, as I said, starting some in early August, some in the middle of August, some in late August or early September. And that gives you a nice continuous harvest. They don't get too big. And you also it's a bit of a hedge as well against weather conditions catching you out. Sometimes you'll lose a batch because of mildew, because it's just really rainy. Sometimes the plants will be a little bit too big and they won't go over winter very well. Sometimes they'll be a little bit too small and they won't actually get through winter successfully. And you never know. There is no perfect date. Some gardeners like to say, oh yes, the perfect date for sowing such and such is the middle of August, the 14th of August or something, like really precise. And it's just nonsense. You don't know what the weather's going to do. Right? So a few different batches are ideal, and often we've got loads of space over winter that we can bung salad onions into, and put a few in a sheltered spot, some in a more sort of exposed place, different successions, and you're just going to have an abundance of salad onions all year round, which is what I like to do. As I say, radish, a few successions of those. They do tend to grow pretty quickly initially. For August, they're pretty quick, and then obviously they start slowing down. And again, by the time we get to sort of October, really they're not going to do very much growing at all, but they'll hold in the ground for a few weeks. Lettuces. So obviously we do a lot of lettuce. I tend to do each succession of lettuce that I sow, I tend to do 9 different varieties, because really, lettuce is a really, really important crop to us. We probably do we're feeding a lot of people. All those people are eating lettuce every day. All my family eating lettuce basically pretty much every day. So, we're really growing a lot of lettuce. At this time of year, I'm doing Grenoble Red, Riccia, Flashy Lightning Butter Oak, maybe not quite that, but anyway, look in the description, you'll find the correct pronunciation. Maureen, which is a little gem, Canasta, and some of the Salanovas. So Halflex is a great one, Extranet is a great one, and Navarra, of course, is a classic, brilliant autumn lettuce. And I'll do Roxy. Now, Roxy isn't a great autumn lettuce, but it's a fabulous winter lettuce, so I need to do a germination test on that, and then I'll probably throw those plants away, because actually they're not very good in August, but they are fabulous over winter. So so that's my kind of first batch. Those are going to last me until the polytunnel lettuces are ready for harvest. So that tends to be the middle of November, something like that. So this is the batch of lettuce. It's going to last all that way. Lettuce lasts a long time, sown in August for a harvest in autumn. And I'm sowing those about the 15th of August. Then I'm going to do another batch of lettuce which are for harvest in winter when my polytunnel lettuces are kind of running out of steam a bit. So I need a few more to get me through winter. And the ones I found that are the best to keep me going through winter are Brighton, which is a traditional green lettuce, Roxy, which is a beautiful kind of bronzy coloured lettuce, and it gets even more beautiful in spring, and Grenoble Red. So yeah, so they're the lettuces, and yeah, then of course we've got the lettuces for the polytunnel in September. So as I promised, I will talk a little bit about September, and because September is a really, really important month if you grow year round and you grow in a polytunnel or greenhouse. Primarily this is all polytunnel, low tunnel, cold frame sort of stuff. So first off, I do, well, for the first time ever, I'm going to do a late carrot for harvest in spring, so sort of April time. So I've done loads of carrots. I always do carrots in October for harvest in sort of May and June. But this is the first one that I'm going to do. I'm going to try it in the ground. I've never tried this before, so I don't know whether it's going to work. I'm going to do Eskimo because it's a really, really great carrot to grow over winter. That's actually the carrot that we normally eat all the way through winter and in March and early April, and then it bolts. So this is the one that we're going to be eating from the middle of April or the beginning of April through until basically it bolts. So we'll see how well that does. But I just thought I'd try it in the ground. I've got enough space, I think, to try it in the ground because we're growing less spinach over winter this year for reasons that I'll go into in another video. So next up are the lettuces that I'm going to grow in the polytunnel. Now I find there's very few lettuces that do well over winter in a polytunnel. It's not so much the cold, it's challenges with growing lettuces year after year after year in the same polytunnel, basically in the same soil. You do tend to get a build-up of disease pressure, and so you need lettuces that are really good at resisting disease. So these are the ones that I grow. So first off, I grow Flashy Lightning Butter Oak. That tends not to survive through winter, but it tends to get well into December, sometimes into January. And the next one I do is Riccia, and that's the same. So again, it does really well through November, early December, almost sometimes into January. And then those beds get cleared and they get replanted with something else for spring. And then the two lettuces that tend to manage to survive over winter are Roxy and Grenoble Red. And there's one final lettuce that I tend to grow, which is Brighton. And Brighton's one that grows a nice heart. And again, it's also pretty resistant to disease. And then you harvest that one in late December and January and early February. So it just gives you like a bit of extra lettuce harvest volume by harvesting the whole bed in winter, and then of course all growth always picks up by the middle of February. So you sort of just need a lot of plants basically in December, late December and January and early February. A lot more plants than you need earlier than that, and a lot more plants than you need later than that when growth has picked up. So those are the lettuces that I'm going to do. As I said, I'm also going to do miner's lettuce. I find if you want to do miner's lettuce to grow under cover, it's really important not to do it too early. So I tend to do it about 5th of September, which means I'm planting it in the polytunnel about the 5th of October. In fact, all of these lettuces I'm putting in the polytunnel about the 5th of October. I want to get it all replanted in the polytunnel by certainly by the 10th, by the 10th of October. It's just that bumblebee keeps distracting me. Spinach in September. So spinach in September will overwinter. But again, I tend not to do that. I tend to do Rubino now, and then later on, I'll do, later on in September, I'll do giant winter, which I think is a better one to harvest over winter. And but it's not very good for salad, so it's great for cooking over winter. And what I'd like to do then is on here, underneath these grow lights in the greenhouse, I'll have a few trays down here of spinach. And spinach does really well under grow lights in midwinter. And of course, it's really nice to have things growing in this greenhouse, especially salad ingredients, because the leaf quality under grow lights is excellent. It's summer quality, leaf quality. And yeah, it makes all the difference compared to sort of, you know, the sort of limp leaf spinach that you'll be harvesting over winter otherwise. And then basically the same again of the Asian greens, but this time to grow under a low tunnel or in a cold frame. And these are for autumn and early winter, and they tend to go to seed in about sort of January time. And so it's important in January to have something ready to put in their place, otherwise you're wasting sort of high value space. And I'm going to do again red stem pak choi, rosetto, komatsuma and tatsoi, all great ingredients in Asian soups and things like that, but also really lovely in salads. Then, almost there, we've got the brassicas that I like to overwinter, and I like to do graffiti cauliflower, Orkney cauliflower, Romanesco cauliflower, which I'm trying for the first, well, I used to try it a few years ago, then I got out of the habit, but I'm trying it again. Marathon calabrese, which is a great one to overwinter, and red drumhead, red cabbage. So all of these overwinter really, really well. And I also, a bit later on in October, I'll do some spring cabbages. I don't tend to do my spring cabbages for planting out. You know, people will be doing spring cabbages in August and late July for planting out in October. But that means I'm using bed space all the way through winter with those cabbages, and they're exposed to the ravages of winter weather and all that sort of thing. I much prefer to do my cabbages in here in small pots, you know, this sort of pot that this cucumber plant's in. So I can get loads of them on this bench, I can look after them, they're not taking up any bed space, and I plant them out in February and March. And so that I just find it so much better, because obviously I've got loads of space in March, because everything's starting to grow really quickly, but then I've not tying up bed space all the way through winter. So yeah, so the reason I do, well, not the reason I do, but one of the things I like about doing Orkney and graffiti cauliflowers is the Orkney come a bit sooner. So about 2 weeks before the graffiti purple cauliflowers, so you get a bit of a succession going there from a single sowing. I'm not quite sure about the Romanescos, as I said, not having done those before or recently. The Marathon calabrese, they grow a little bit faster than the cauliflowers, so it's best doing those 2 or 3 weeks later. And if you wanted to, and you've got grow lights, you can actually do calabrese much later on in the year, and it'll still come within sort of 2 or 3 weeks of a September sowing. And then just a few more successions of lettuce and spinach and things like that. So that is a sort of overview, very quick overview of the highlights of September. There's loads more that we'll do in September that we'll go through in the September video, but I thought I'd just give you a bit of a sneak peek of what I'm doing in September, because it's such an important month, and it's so easy to do things too early. It's so easy to start your lettuces, for example, in August and put them in your polytunnel, and they're just going to be too big. They're not going to overwinter very well at all. Same with your brassicas, it's easy to do them too early, and again they're going to be too big and they're going to go to seed on you too early in spring. So getting these timings right, and it is a bit dependent on your own sort of growing conditions, but that's my system. And I've got growing guides for all of these things, so when you look in the description you'll see links to all the growing guides. And I've also got my weekly newsletter, which is, I think it's really useful. A lot of people, thousands and thousands of people subscribe to it, so it must be fairly useful to some people. And that goes through everything week by week. So what I'm sowing that week, what I'm pricking out what I'm potting on, what I'm harvesting, well, what I'm planting, what I'm harvesting, all the pests and diseases that I'm dealing with, where I'm planting everything, you know, all the sort of details around, you know, my progress in the greenhouse, the progress outside, the progress on the allotment, all of that, all those little details about how I grow. You can find all that in the newsletter. And I think that is a lot easier to use than my ebook, which is a huge ebook, and it's great, you know, it's quite good, but it's just hard to navigate, you know, on a what should I do now sort of basis. So it's great if you want to sort of sit down and read over winter or something like that, you know, for a few days. But if you just want to know this week, what do I do? The newsletter's the place to go. Right, I'm done. My name's Steve, this is the Outgrow channel, and I'll see you soon.